Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajadana Randana Yashodanandana Brajadana Randana Yamuna Tira Vanasari Yamuna Tira Vanasari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajadana Randana Yashodanandana Brajadana Randana Jamuna Tira Vanasari Jamuna Tira Vanasari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhav, Radha Madhav, Radhe. Jaya Radha Madhav, Radha Madhav, Radhe. Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada 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 Gaura Pimanande Jai Vishupad Paramahamsa Pri Vrajagacharya Stotra Satta Sri Simar His Divine Grace Sarabhai Charanarvandi Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Skandi Biti Founder Acharya Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Samavata Bhakti Vrinda Ki Harinam Sankirtan Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Nitai Gaura Pimanande. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Sri Guru, to Sri Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Actually, it would be nice to have, as we normally do for class, Tulsi here. Yeah, you can remove this. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Taksuranmiritam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Parakamalam Sri Gurun Vaisnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sabadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Visakanvitam Scha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhyaeva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Narayanam Namaskritya Ram Cheva Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. Before reciting this Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, let us first offer respectful obeisances unto Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayan Rishi, the supremmost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta prayesha badreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Tamasloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. By regularly hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering a service unto the pure devotee, All that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed practically to nil. And loving devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, who is praised with transcendental songs, becomes established as an irrevocable fact. Idam Bhagavatam Nama Puranam Brahmasamhitam Uttama Shloka Charitam Chakara Bhagavan Rishi Nishreyasaya Lokasya Dhanyam Swasayanam Maha. This Srimad Bhagavatam, known as the Grantaraj, the king of all Vedic literatures, is the literary incarnation of God. It is compiled by the incarnation of God, Srila Vyasadeva. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people. It is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Prabhu Nityananda, Sri Advaita Gadadhara, Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Sarabhyaya Namaha, Om Sarabhyaya Namaha, Om Sarabhyaya Namaha, Mukam Karoti Vacharam Pangum Nangayate Girim Yatkripa Tamaham Bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam Yatkripa Tamaham Bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Welcome to our Bhagavatam class. Continuing from canto number 2, chapter number 1. And the text today is 18. 1, 8. Yes. Niyached Vishayebhyo Kshang Manasa Buddhi Saratihi Manaha Karmabhir Akshiptam Shubharte Dharayad Dhiya Niyached Vishayebhiksham Niyached Vishayebhiksham Manasa Buddhi Saratihi Mana Karmabir Akshiptam Shubharte Dharayat Dhiya Niyached Vishayebhiksham Manasa Buddhi Saratihi Mana Karmabhir Akshiptam akshiptam
Mana karmabhir akshiptam
Shabharte dharayat dhiya
Subhate dharayat diya
Niyached vishaye bhyukshan
Niyached vishayebhyokshan
Manasa buddhi sarati
Manasa buddhisarati
Mana karmabir akshiptam
Mana karmabhir akshiptam
Shabharte dharayat dhiya
Subhate dharayat diya
Niyached vishayobhyakshan
Niyached vishayebhyokshan
Manasa buddhi sarati
Manasa buddhi sarati
Manakarma bhirakshiptam
Manakarma virakshiptam
Bhate dharayadhiya
Shabharte dharayat dhiya
Niyached Vishaye Vyokshan
Niyached vishayebhyokshan
Manasa Buddhi Saratihi
Manasa buddhi sarati
Mana Karma Vir Akshitam
Manakarma virakshiptam
Subharte Dharayedhiya
Shabharte dharayat dhiya
Niyached vishayebhyokshan
Niyached vishayebhyokshan
Manasa buddhisarati
Manasa buddhi sarati
Mana karmabhir akshiptam
Manakarma virakshiptam
Subhate dharayat diya
Subhate Dharayedhiya
Niyachet
Niyached
withdraw
Withdraw
Vishayebhyaha
Vishayebhyaha
from sense engagements
from sense engagements
Akshan
Shan
the senses
the senses
Manasa
Manasa
by dint of the mind
by dint of the mind
Buddhi
Buddhi
intelligence
Intelligence
Saratihi
Sarati
driver
driver
Manaha
Manaha
the mind
the mind
Karmabhihi
karmabhir
by the fruitive work
by the fruity word
Akshiptam
Akshiptam
being absorbed in
being absorbed in
Shubha Arte
Bhakti
for the sake of the Lord.
for the sake of the Lord.
Dharayat
Dharayat
hold up
hold up
Dhiya
Diya
in full consciousness.
in full consciousness.
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki.
Jai
Gradually, as the mind becomes progressively spiritualized, withdraw it from sense activities, and by intelligence, the senses will be controlled. The mind, too absorbed in material activities, can be engaged in the service of the personality of Godhead and become fixed in full transcendental consciousness. Kind of repeat after me. Gradually, as the mind becomes
as the mind becomes
progressively spiritualized,
progressively spiritualized,
withdraw it
withdraw it
from sense activities,
from sense activities,
and by intelligence,
and by intelligence,
the senses will be controlled.
senses will be controlled.
The mind, too absorbed
The mind is too absorbed
in material activities,
in material activities,
can be engaged
can be engaged
in the service of the service
in the service
of the personality of Godhead
of the personality of Godhead
and become fixed
and become fixed
in full
in full
transcendental consciousness.
transcendental consciousness.
Purport. The first process of spiritualizing the mind by mechanical chanting of the Pranava Omkara and by control of the breathing system is technically called the mystic or yogic process of pranayama, or fully control the breathing air. We actually read that yesterday. So why you told me today's text is 18? The ultimate state of this pranayama system is to be fixed in trance, technically called samadhi. But experience has proven that even the samadhi stage also fails to control the materially absorbed mind. For example, the great mystic Vishvamitra Muni, even in the stage of samadhi, became a victim of the senses and cohabited with Menaka. History has already recorded this. The mind, although ceasing to think of sensual activities at present, remembers past sensual activities from the subconscious status and thus disturbs one from 10% engagement in self-realization. Therefore, Shukadeva Goswami recommends the next step of assured policy, namely, to fix one's mind in the service of the personality of Godhead. Lord Sri Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, also recommends this process, this direct process, in the Bhagavad-Gita 6:47. Thus, the mind, being spiritually cleansed, one should at once engage himself in the transcendental loving service of the Lord by the different devotional activities of hearing, chanting, etc. If performed under proper guidance, that is the surest path of progress, even for the disturbed mind. Translation again. Gradually, as the mind becomes progressively spiritualized, withdraw it from sense activities, and by intelligence, the senses will be controlled. The mind, too absorbed in material activities, can be engaged in the service of the personality of Godhead and become fixed in full transcendental consciousness. As I was reading this verse, the last verse of the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita came to mind, and it reads as follows. This is after a series of questions being asked by Arjuna to Lord Krishna regarding the mind. It's all about the mind. Krishna consciousness is all about the mind. Maharaj, what to do with my mind? That question comes up again and again and again. Yeah. So Krishna spends a lot of time actually on this point in the Bhagavad-Gita, instructing Arjuna what to do with my mind. Because this is the point being made here. If the mind is not engaged in the service of Krishna, then the mind will be disturbed. Because the natural position, the natural activity, the natural identity, we can say, or nature of the mind is what are the activities of the mind? Thinking, feeling, willing. The natural propensity of the living entity, it's not that the living entity is not having mind. Because spiritual life is all about thinking, feeling, and willing. Thinking about Krishna, desiring or willing to serve Him more and more. And by thinking of Krishna, by desiring to serve Him, thinking, feeling, then one evokes transcendental feelings or emotions. There is a reciprocation based on loving sentiments that gradually takes place. So this is the culmination of Krishna's exchange with Arjuna in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, where there is nice reference. I mean, the same kind of message is being, well, actually, I'll read the one just before the last one, which is 42. Indriyani para nyahur indriyebhya param manaha manasastu para buddhi yo buddhe pratastu saha. Krishna is explaining the working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. Everything very nicely explained actually in the Bhagavad-Gita. Therefore, the need, the importance to understand how this body that we have been awarded is working, how it is functioning. We have the gross body, then we have the subtle body. So here, in the last verse, a very important verse, evam buddhe param buddva samsta manam atmana jahi shatrum mahabaho kamarupam durasadam. Translation. Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to material senses, mind, and intelligence, one should control the lower self by the higher self, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer the insatiable enemy known as lust. As long as the mind and intelligence and ego is not in line with the soul, with who we are, then we are on the bodily platform. We are on the platform of so-called material enjoyment, which is kama. Kama means lust, as described here. So Krishna consciousness, therefore, as nicely mentioned here in the text, whether it is through the Astanga process of yoga, whether it is through the karma process or jnana process, is meant to gradually purify the consciousness so that we can attain and come to the topmost consciousness. Prabhupada nicely points out that samadhi is not really the end of all, because even in samadhi, as so many examples are given, the one of Vishwamitra Muni is not fully secure. Why? Because until and unless our whole being, beginning with our senses, our mind, and our intelligence, are fully engaged in the service of Krishna, then there is all possibility that we will be allured or drawn to other activities, isn't it? Yeah. So spiritual life, successful spiritual life, is when we learn to engage more and more all that we have in terms of this body, in terms of this gross body, in terms of the subtle body, in the direct service of Krishna. So that's why until and unless one comes to the position of this service, of this bhakti, bhakti yoga, then one's position is not secure. This is being conveyed here, and the point also being made is that even in even in the neophyte or beginning stage, that position is of being engaged, in the various devotional activities. Prabhupada makes a point also in the purport. The 9 main activities of devotional service, beginning with hearing and chanting, Sravanam Kirtanam, Vishnu Sparanam, up until Atma Nivedanam. They are the most powerful activities that can help to gradually, more and more, continue to purify the consciousness. So in this way, we need to understand the different levels, and the point made here and also in the Bhagavad-Gita, we need to utilize our higher consciousness, or the higher self. The mind is higher than dull matter, intelligence is higher than the mind, and he, the soul, is still higher than the intelligence. So it means that we can only come out of this material entanglement by cultivation of spiritual knowledge, and not allow ourselves to, as is often the case, as is always the case actually, as is always the case for those who are not practicing spiritual life, and as is often the case for those who are practicing spiritual life. Same problem. Those who are not practicing spiritual life, they're completely forced by the laws of nature. They're forced by their uncontrolled mind to engage in all kinds of material activities, and therefore, naturally they are disturbed. They are in anxiety. They're perplexed. They're confused, isn't it? That is, and that is all, of course, connected with the gunas, the modes of material nature. That's very nicely explained I'll be speaking on that today actually. 14th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, the modes of material nature. It's quite interesting. Krishna spends a lot of time in that chapter. Actually, in that chapter has 27 verses. And Krishna speaks 26 of those verses. Okay, because it's only at the end Krishna asks a question, how to recognize someone who is no longer under the influence of the modes of material nature, because Krishna very elaborately explains the difficulties and the position of those under the modes of material nature. What are the characteristics of someone under the mode of goodness, or under the mode of passion, or under the mode of ignorance? Of course, mode of goodness is the best of the three, but even that is not secure, isn't it? Yeah. So, whether it's in the Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad-Gita, we are being brought constantly to this point of engaging our mind, especially, which will in turn engage our senses properly in the service of the Lord, being directed by our higher, in the beginning stage, our higher material intelligence, but in the advanced stage, our higher spiritual intelligence. Spiritual intelligence is that intelligence that is fully, completely based on the spiritual instructions that are given in Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. So that means that we see another example in the personality of Dharabharat. He was in Samadhi. He had reached even beyond Samadhi. I mean, he was at the doorstep of Krishna Prema. He had developed to the level of Bhava-Bhakti. Bhava-Bhakti is not an easy level to attain. Bhava-Bhakti is in the higher echelon, it's like after one becomes completely fixed up, solidly established in the philosophy, and solidly, firmly engaged in devotional activities, nistha, the stage of nistha. Then further levels, develop in terms of attraction to or taste, developing a very strong taste, and becoming very attached to performing activities. These are all levels even before Bhava Bhakti. But even at the level of Bhava Bhakti, Dharabharat became allured, isn't it, by the condition of the deer, and developed attachment for that small deer. So, although there are these different pitfalls are there, the point being that knowing that there are these pitfalls, and that even great personalities who have come to the level of after many years of severe practices, have come to the level of samadhi, or even of bhava bhakti, still there are dangers unless we train our mind to be nicely engaged. And that's why in the beginning of the movement, and we can see that even now, Srila Prabhupada gave many instructions he actually induced, we could say, and arranged for devotees to be engaged in many different activities, many projects, many activities of devotional service, and that is very important to avoid, if we're not, in other words, properly engaged, if we don't have sufficient service, then the mind will wander in other places. So therefore, that's also mentioned in other places by Srila Prabhupada. We should arrange our day and our lives in such a way that we're busy in our different services, etc. Quickly reading again the verse. Yeah, it begins with gradually. It means it's a gradual approach. Gradually, as the mind becomes progressively spiritualized, withdraw it from sense activities, and by intelligence, the senses will be controlled. Exact same as instructed in the Bhagavad-Gita. The mind, too absorbed in material activities, can be engaged in the service of the personality of Godhead and become fixed in full transcendental consciousness. Comments? Questions? Yes?
In Bhakti Rasamrita Singh, they are when we perform the bhakti, the result first is the Kleshagni, Shubhada, and the Sandhanam Laksheta. And last it's explained that it is Sudharlava, it's not easily attainable. Bhakti.
Yes, in the very beginning of the Bhakti Nectar devotion, Srila Rupa Goswami explains 6 of the symptoms of Bhakti devotional service, one of them being that it is very rarely attained.
Then one sloka and explain 9th chapter Bhagavad-Gita, that Susukham Kartavavyam.
Susukam Kartavavyam, yes.
So how to understand is very difficult to understand when place explain as an effort of devotion. And 9th chapter explains that very easily attainable.
Yeah, that verse. Rajavidya, Rajaguyam, Pavitram, Idam, Uttamam, Pratyakshavagamam, Dharmyam, Susukam, Kartamavyayam. So how to understand that it is very rare, rarely attained. And then Krishna is telling that Susukam Kartamavyayam. So, 2 things is that even we are not in the Nectar devotion, it explains that to attain that pure, unmotivated, uninterrupted level of bhakti is very rare. And of course, when one attains that level, he is completely, fully transcendental, no longer disturbed by the material elements or material energy. The verse that you're referring to in the Bhagavad-Gita, where it says that, Susukam Kartamavyayam, obviously that liberated level, it is completely, fully transcendental, and therefore one experiences fully transcendental, bliss, prema, mahabhava, of course, which is especially those who are liberated personalities. But even before attaining that level, even one is not on that complete platform, performance of devotional activities are pleasurable. They bring satisfaction. If we perform, even though we are not completely freed from the modes of material nature, we experience satisfaction, happiness in being with devotees. Is it not? we like to come to holy places, is it not? I mean, we are all in holy places. We are in association with devotees. We experience to different degrees. To different degrees, we experience a pleasure, satisfaction, happiness. In again, it may not be completely pure, but you know, why do we go to classes? Why do we visit holy places? Why do we cook food that is cooked in a particular way and then offered to the Lord? Because we experience. It will vary, of course, from one individual to another, but we can experience what is mentioned by Krishna in that verse, Susukam kartam avyayam, that performing these activities brings us satisfaction. It may be mixed. It's like we may not always fully experience the pleasure that is there in performing all of these activities, but all of us, to some extent or other, are experiencing some satisfaction. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. You know, we would not continue to endeavor if we're not experiencing something, if we're not having some kind of realization. So, the full pleasure and satisfaction and the full realization, of course, we never completely, Prabhupada would explain, we never completely will understand Krishna. We never completely, fully will be able to love Krishna because Krishna is unlimited and because we are dealing with things that are of an unlimited nature as well. But the more we perform these activities, we, to different extent, to different levels, and that's very much individual matter. It will obviously depend on our efforts in performing these activities, our level of consciousness, etc. But even before reaching the perfectional stage, we can still experience pleasure, happiness, satisfaction in different levels or different activities of devotional service. You don't like cooking? You like cooking. You don't like taking prasadam? You like taking prasadam, isn't it?
Impersonalists also go through hard struggle to get that.
Huh?
Impersonalists,
Yeah.
they also working very hard to reach their goal, the impersonal Brahman. And the Bhakti Yogi, he also hardly struggling to go to Golok Vrindavan.
Yes.
So as I explained, that is very susukham and it is very easily attainable. Very easily attainable. So why to we have like a impersonal?
Susukam doesn't mean easily attainable. Susukam means happily performed.
Yeah, I mean, it seems sometimes, I mean, Bhakti Yogi also.
Yeah, if one properly applies the process, then he can easily get the result. You know? So to the extent that we are applying the process, we will easily get the result. To the extent that we are holding back, then that full result will not be there. The verse here this morning begins with gradually.
Yeah.
Gradually, comma, stop. Gradually. It's a gradual process. Yeah. But Prabhupada does mention also, because that question was being asked, well, how long is this going to take? How long does it take to become Krishna conscious? Which is a valid question. And what did Prabhupada say?
1 minute.
Yeah. Not even 1 minute. Not even 1 second. Minute is long. Second is less. 60 seconds in a minute. So it is completely dependent on two things. In our full surrender, if we fully surrender, then Krishna will be obliged, so to speak, to reciprocate. So it is dependent on our effort, our sincere effort, and then on the mercy of Krishna that will come according to our surrender. Okay? Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jai Srila Prabhupada ki, Gaura Pimanandi.